This happened just last week during my final week at home before heading back to college. I've been debating whether to even write about it, but I can't stop thinking about what might be happening at home. My parents recently moved after I graduated high school. They'd been talking about downsizing for years, and once I was heading off to college, they finally pulled the trigger. The timing meant I'd only been to the new place a handful of times. My parents gave me the basic tour when they first bought it, pointing out where everything was and explaining some of the quirks of an older home. One thing they specifically mentioned was that the house didn't have a basement, just a crawl space for utilities. They seemed pretty definitive about that, so I never gave it much thought. My parents had left the night before for a week-long vacation, so I had the place to myself. The first night I noticed anything strange was a Tuesday. I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard this tapping sound coming from directly below the floor. It was consistent, both rhythmically and volume-wise. At first, I thought it might be the heating system or maybe pipe settling, but it didn't stop, which made me second-guess myself. I should mention that the room I am sleeping in is on the first floor of the house, so the sounds were definitely coming from underground. I got up and walked around the room trying to pinpoint where exactly the sound was coming from, but it seemed to be coming from everywhere beneath the floor. What made it so disturbing was that, according to my parents, there was supposed to be nothing down there but a crawl space. The idea that I was hearing sounds from below ground level when there's supposedly any livable space down there was genuinely unsettling. Eventually, the tapping finally stopped, and I was able to fall asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I figured that would be the end of it. I had probably just been hearing old house sounds or an animal scuttling around in the crawl space, but I was dead wrong. Later that night, around the same time, I started hearing that same tapping sound again, only this time it was noticeably louder. I explained it away and just went to sleep, but I remember feeling a lot more uncomfortable that night than the first. When the noises started up a third time in a row, I knew something was seriously wrong. There was a considerable escalation that night. Instead of just tapping, I heard dragging and scraping sounds. Too, like some kind of animal raking its claws against something and occasionally dragging something. That's the best way I can describe what I was hearing. I kept trying to rationalize what I was hearing against what I knew about the house. The logical part of my brain kept insisting there had to be a reasonable explanation, but I couldn't think of one. The sounds were way too clear and way too purposeful to dismiss as normal house sounds anymore. I started wondering if maybe my parents had been wrong about the basement thing, or if there was some kind of utility access I didn't know about. Either way, it was freaky sitting in that dark room with nothing but scraping and tapping to keep me company. The next morning, I told my parents about what had been going on. My dad immediately told me to check the crawl space for animals, worried that maybe something had gotten in there that shouldn't have. Primera real, I didn't want to check down there, but I figured I didn't have much of a choice. The crawl space entrance is right under the porch, so I had to get my hands dirty to investigate it properly. And although I was holding my breath the entire time, terrified at what I'd find down there was nothing, not even any animals. My dad seemed satisfied with that explanation and told me not to worry about it anymore. But personally, I was unsatisfied, and honestly, kind of frustrated with the lack of answers. I decided to look for other possible explanations. Maybe there was some kind of external access around the house I'd missed, or evidence of animals getting in somewhere else. As I was walking the perimeter, I noticed a pile of old construction materials leaning against the side of the house: lumber, tarps, concrete blocks, stuff like that. They looked like they'd been there for a while, maybe left over from some previous renovation project. It wasn't like I hadn't noticed the stuff until then. I just always kind of overlooked them since I never had a reason not to. I started moving materials,